So, welcome everybody to Weeding in the Garden of Good and Evil. We're happy that you were able to join us today. We have about a 2 hour presentation that we're going to provide and cover all aspects of weeding. The recording will be posted probably in the next day or two. So, feel free to get up during these 2 hours and take a break if you need to. 2 hours is an awfully long time, so we want you to be comfortable while you're joining us. So just keep that in mind as we go along. We will also be utilizing the chat for questions and for any back and forth conversation you'd like to have with your colleagues. Uh, we will answer the question if it's pertinent right at the time that we see it, but we also may wait if we know that the information is going to come up in a slide in just a few minutes. So um, at the end, we also will go back and review all the questions that were in the chat and address them at that time too. So we will definitely get to your questions. We look forward to your questions. This is definitely part of the whole process. Next slide, Kim. So for introductions, I'm going to introduce myself and then Kim will introduce herself. And we're going to talk a little bit about the reading experience that we have. So I am Brad Bullis from the Connecticut State Library, and I oversee the EgoCT ebook platform. I also oversee the Requested CT program, which uses fulfillment for interlibrary loan. And I oversee the Research at CT program, which is our 38 databases. And we'll talk a little bit about those and how they relate to collection development and weeding as we go along. I have been working in libraries for almost 30 years, and I initially worked in a public library in terms of weeding, and I oversaw the 900s and the 300s. And I did all the shelf reading and all the weeding for that as part of my collection management and development process. So it was something that took a lot of time, but was very important to do on a consistent basis. And we also, while I was in a public library, did a major weed of the fiction collection, which had to be sort of like a lightning weed because we had an upcoming renovation for a cafe and a makerspace being installed. So we had to be really quick. So that's a different kind of weeding, and we're going to address that a little bit as well. But also here at the Middletown Library Service Center that Kim and I work at, we have done weeding together and separately. I have weeded with Kim on a number of areas, large print, some children in YA, and also the books on CD collection, which I am in the process of weeding. And that's a format that is sort of on the way out a little bit, and so that has implications for your weeding decisions as well. So as we get into this, we'll talk more about that, but I'll pass it to Kim now as well.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Poe. I am the children and young adult consultant here at the Connecticut State Library. Don't mind me if I look off to the side. I'm still letting folks in. I have worked in libraries for about 16, 17-ish years. I started in academic libraries as a state employee when I went to Western Connecticut State University. Took a little break before going back to library school. And I have worked just sort of up and down the shoreline, quite frankly, public libraries for 7 years before moving up here to the state library. And I will have been here for 6 years in August. And like Brad said, he and I have worked together here in the service center on a lot of weeding. It's kind of a revolving door. Anyone who's been in this space knows that we have a lot of output, but this is not a big building. We do not have all the room in the world, so we've got to do a lot of work to keep our collections current so that we can better fuel the needs of those in our community. And I've done a lot of weeding in youth services. It was actually my grad school culminating experience project before I graduated was a big weeding project. And I've been giving this presentation here at the state for as long as I've been here. So we're happy to have you all, and we're excited to go through this process today.
All right, so as you can see, that's the agenda for the day. So let's get started with weeding in the Garden of Good and Evil. So the first thing I'd like to do is talk about statewide resource sharing because this does impact your weeding decisions along the way. So we'll just go through the different services that are provided by the Division of Library Development. So these are all links that you can click on. So that's one nice thing about this presentation. There are lots of links here. Kim went through and checked them all, so they all do function properly. But you can go through and look at the presentation afterwards and look in a deeper way of all these links that I'm going to describe right now. So the first link is to the Division of Library Development LibGuide. So you can go there and kind of see everything that we have. Um, the first area I want to talk about is the Middletown Library Service Center. We are a library for librarians, so you're always welcome to stop by. We love when people come by and we can kind of give them a tour, show them all the great stuff that we have, and you can browse the collection and you can take materials with you to go back to your library with. So there's lots of great stuff here. We have professional development books, we have discussion sets, book discussion sets, we have book props, we have puppets. I always think of Night at the Museum, so that when I go home at night and we shut the lights off, I assume there's something going on in the library with those puppets, that they're having a good time, but they're really fun. We have a great large print collection. We have story time kits. So there's lots of children and YA titles. So there's tons of materials that you can take advantage of and bring to your library for your patrons to use. So definitely check that out, what we have. The other thing in terms of resources that are available, deliver it is these are all going to kind of touch each other. These different services that we have, they all connect in some way. So as I go through, you'll start to see that. So we have Deliver It, which basically is a delivery service from library to library. We pick up books at one library, we bring them to a central sorting area, and then they get delivered to another library. So that's a great feature, very unique that we have this here in the state of Connecticut. Um, the other thing I want to talk about is Research It, because Research It is something that is provided for free to all of you. It has 38 databases that in lots of ways can act as your reference collection. And so when you're making decisions about your reference collection, you want to think about Research It and then any databases that you might have in terms of can I let this go because it's actually covered in Research It and it's newer in Research It because it's easy to update. So Research It is another great resource that we provide to the K through 12s, the public libraries, and the academics here in Connecticut. There's also EgoCT and the Palace Project, which EgoCT is the program, the ebook program that we have, and Palace Project is the app where you access that content. So that's another place where you might find a book that wouldn't be found otherwise, or if you let go of a book, you could refer a patron to either the Palace Project or maybe Overdrive or Hoopla to find that item. So it's another way you can kind of look at the reach of your collection, and it helps you make decisions when you're reading. The other program is Find It, and we've kind of lumped in Request It with that. And that's because Request It uses Find It, which is the statewide catalog, as its database. So Find It is the statewide union catalog. Request It is the interlibrary loan program that uses fulfillment to send and receive requests by libraries for interlibrary loan requests. So you can start to see how things connect a little bit. And then we have Borrow It CT, which is another somewhat unique program here in Connecticut that we have. Not all states have programs like this, but this allows a patron to take their hometown library card and go to any other library in the state of Connecticut and check materials out. Then they can return that item to their hometown library and it gets sent back to the lending library via Deliver It. So again, you see the whole kind of circle of resource sharing that occurs, all based really on the work that we do at the Division of Library Development. The other area that is located at the Middletown Library Service Center is the Connecticut Library for Accessible Books. Matt Giza is the director there. He does a great job, lots of outreach, but that provides those that are visually impaired or print disabled with access to all sorts of resources that they can find. So I recommend you check that out as well if you're not already familiar with it. Next slide, Kim. And this is you.
It is. Thank you, Brad. So now that Brad's touched a little bit about the databases and resources that we have to help supplement some things that might have to leave your library's collection, let's talk about the collection itself. The first thing to remember is that less is more sometimes, depending on our space. We want our collections to be browsable. We want our titles to be discoverable. And if we have jam-packed shelves that maybe look disheveled, and sometimes even the fact of something being visually appealing might dissuade or convince someone to go through our shelves, to do some browsing, to hunt for titles that they are looking forward to reading. The look of the shelf can have an effect on how a patron does or does not want to interact with our library. It can seem kind of silly because we know the value of what's on our shelves and what's in our collection. But sometimes we have to put ourselves into the shoes of Joe Library, who's just coming to patron their local space, or maybe they've got a little bit of time before they have something else to do in the community. So we have to be cognizant of what our spaces look like, yes, but also what our shelves look like and how welcoming or accessible they might be. We're looking for a quality over quantity type of mindset when contemplating our collections here. So this is a weeding workshop where we are here to tell you a bit about weeding. But the unfortunate reality and kind of where we're going to start is that there is no one way to do this. I am a Connecticut transplant, but I've been here so long that I might as well just claim the state at this point. But if there's one thing that I know about being here is that there are 169 towns and 169 ways to do things. So as we all sit here and listen to this workshop, I think it's important to think about the fact that maybe what works for one person's library, it might not work for your library, and that's okay. And maybe you might hear some information and think like, well, we might have to tweak that in order for that to work for our space, or it's just not for us at all. I think that's okay. And while we will be sharing some information to help make informed decisions in the weeding of our collection, and quite frankly, we are going to be sharing some formulas. You really sometimes like it depends on what's happening, and sometimes those formulas and that information is going to have to be set aside depending on your community and your space. But ultimately, what we want all of this to boil down to is we want to have a well thought out collection development policy that really needs to be built into your weeding needs to be built into your collection development policy. We are going to have, as Brad said, a bunch of links throughout this session, and I will share the link to our weeding workshop LibGuides page. We actually have the collection management plan for the Middletown Library Service Center there, as well as a couple of other examples for folks to look at, and you will see that weeding is explicitly built into our collection management policy because we are looking at the management of a collection and not just the acquisitions of a collection. It's important to be well informed, not only about the books in the collection, but about the community that you are in, right? What historical significance might there be in the town that may affect what's in your collection? How might the town be changing? Maybe it's an aging community, so maybe that affects some of the titles that you want in your collection, which means other things might have to leave in order to make space for how your community has adjusted. Having that information can be really pertinent to collection management and the weeding process. And be familiar with books and authors and other library material. There are more public libraries than towns in the state of Connecticut. You can't throw a rock without coming close to a library. So sometimes, if we have enough familiarity and understanding, it's okay if we don't have something because we might be able to get it in a day or two for our patrons. That's what resource sharing is all about. And we are very lucky here in this state to have a very robust system to allow for regular resource sharing in a way that may not be perfect, but like works really well. Anything's better than USPS sometimes. So in addition to that, you want to be familiar with your library's strategic plan, 5-year plan, long range plan. Some of us have different names for it, but some of the information that's in that plan might have an effect on what it is that you choose to do or need to do with your library collection. I mentioned perhaps your community is aging, and perhaps in your library collection management plan or long range plan, there is a goal or information in there about better serving the aging community or the aging population in the community. That information is going to include your library collection, and the information that's in that plan may affect the way that you acquire titles. And when we acquire titles, we have to get rid of things as well to make space for discoverability and browsability. So having an understanding not just of books and our neighbors and our community, but our own policies and plans and procedures for our libraries are going to affect this process as well. It's also important to know your community's needs and interests. So to sort of carry on with the analogy, maybe you have an aging population, but maybe there has been a history of like fighter pilots or something in the town and in the community. And maybe that's a natural community need and a natural community interest. So we're going to want to know about that because that's also going to affect our collection. There's a town in Connecticut where Helen Keller lived for a multitude of her life. There are a lot of Helen Keller books in that library, more so than the average library. I know, I worked in it. And you're going to want to take all of this into account, right? These multiple tips that we are sharing as you contemplate and go through the process of weeding your collection. It's important to remember when managing our collection. It's hard because at the end of the day, we're people, but our job is ultimately to fulfill the needs of our communities, which sometimes might butt up against some of the things that are in our heart. It broke my heart to get rid of some of my favorite childhood reads. The Boxcar Children had to go, the Animorphs had to go, and it was hard. But the world has grown, shifted, and changed, and it was something that needed to happen in order for us to bring in new and exciting things for our young readers.
All right, so that begs the question, why weed? And this is a question that is not just hypothetical. You will be asked while you're weeding sometimes, why are you weeding? So it's good to sort of understand what's behind it, why you do it, and have good answers for your patrons, for your board members, for your fellow staff members. So, obviously weeding is a critical part of collection management. You weed, you interact with the collection. It helps you make good decisions about one, what shouldn't be on the shelf, but also what should be on the shelf. It helps you decide what to purchase. So it's all part of again, a process of collection management that's incredibly important. And you should be able to talk to it as you're doing it. It does help you identify gaps in the collection. It also might identify things that you have too much of or things that are dated. So when you go through and you look at the collection and you have a process for removing materials that are no longer useful and don't enhance the quality of your collection, this is why you weed, along with, next slide. Again, the question of why weed, you're going to be asked. And so sometimes people will see you removing something, they think it's irresponsible. They think you're just irresponsibly throwing materials away that might be of interest. But you're using your professional skill to evaluate using the crew method to determine what is best for your borrowers and what makes your collection look good to the community. So it's really important that you can answer those questions because truly weeding improves the collection in a multitude of ways that we'll discuss as we go through the presentation. Next slide. So the benefits of weeding, the ones that are overt is it saves, and not only saves space, but it creates space. It's one of those things where if you suddenly remove some materials and you have the top shelf is empty, the bottom shelf is empty. It's ergonomically better, so it saves space and it can truly create space in your library. If you need additional community space. Weeding can somehow remove some of the books from the shelves, and you might even be able to remove some shelving. And this is something you factor in as we bring in new formats as well. But it saves time. It saves time for your patrons who are trying to find a book, or staff that are trying to shelve. When I first started working in a public library, almost every time we shelved, we had to shift. That's a really tough way to have to do your work. It takes something that's really pretty simple, taking a book off the cart and putting it back on the shelf in the right place, to this arduous process. And so that was when we realized we really have to get our game on with weeding, and not do a one-time weed, but make it a continuous process. So when you weed, you do make the collection much more appealing. People go and they can see what they're looking for. The books aren't falling off the shelves. And you even have the opportunity sometimes, if you can make enough space, that you can kind of do little displays of an item that represents kind of what's on that shelf, that people might be interested in. So you can do some face out bookshelf uh, displays. So that's helps in increasing circulation. You make the collection more appealing, and studies have shown that when you weed, your circulation increases. Next slide. So additional benefits of weeding. Obviously, you want to be within your community, someone that your community looks to for accuracy, reliability, currency. So when you weed, you remove a lot of the dead wood, you remove things that are no longer relevant or accurate from your shelves, and your collection looks that much better. So your reputation is enhanced and the value of the library is enhanced. It allows you to keep up with collection needs, because if you're in the collection, shelf reading and weeding, you're looking at the collection and you're thinking about the collection, and you can identify areas that you may need to improve upon. It's that constant insight to the collection's strengths and weaknesses that you can't get from looking at a online catalog. You can only really see it when you're in the stacks, and you can kind of see things the way they're laid out in a row, because it's the way, if it's Dewey Decimal, you can kind of look at the subject area that you're working in, and there's sort of a flow of information that is transmitted by the Dewey numbers as they move through that subject area. So you're really able to identify the strengths and weakness of the collection. Next slide. This is Kim.
This is me. So we had talked about information from the perspective of weeding and how that should be integrated into your collection management policy or your material selection policy. And within that information, again, like Brad mentioned, there might be some folks who are just scandalized at the thought that certain library books are leaving the library. So within our policies, we want to make sure that we are explaining why we are doing what we are doing and what that process is going to be. So we want to explain some of the reasons for weeding certain materials, and we're actually going to give you some really helpful information and acronyms that can ultimately go on to be shared with concerned patrons. Things like books just sort of being well loved, I like to say, right? Which is code for kind of destroyed, or outdated material. We're going to dive into that, but it's important to share that information with patrons because they want to know, and sometimes it's easier to have the information out front and to have a place to direct them to, so that everything's just kind of like out in the open and looks like it's on the up and up. We want to include the criteria that we're using for weeding so that patrons know that, as Brad mentioned, we are tapping into our expertise as librarians when we're on this process. We are not just willy-nilly tossing out books that like maybe we personally don't like or something like that. Like there is a reason behind everything that we're doing. And we're going to want to share what we're doing with these items that we are weeding. We have links that we will be sharing for disposal methods. I know that's like a huge thing that we're constantly looking for during the weeding process. But please share this information with your residents or have it somewhere discoverable by your community residents because they want to know, and they should know, right? They should understand what's happening, to just sort of make the ultimate understanding and conversation around our collections easier, at the end of the day. Just answer the questions before they even ask. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of examples of some policies. We will be sharing out these slides along with the recording when they are ready in a couple of days, but there's a direct link to the Service Center collection policy, as well as a couple of other libraries that have really good layouts that we wanted to share with you all, as well. So now let's talk about this criteria that we mentioned, that we are going to give you, and just fluidity, right? Like it's all flexible. But we're going to break our reading criteria down into sort of three sections, right? Contents, what is the material, the format of the material, and when we say use, we mean the circulation, like how often is it being utilized and sort of flowing through our community. So content, when we are evaluating a title from our library for content, what are we looking for? Is the material outdated, misleading, or factually inaccurate? And that can include a lot of things. That can include everything from poor Pluto, may she rest in peace outside of our solar system, we get some finished copies and some ARC books from publishers, and there is a beautiful, beautiful book that I was flipping through that I could not put on our shelves. I mean, I desperately wanted to find a loophole to add this book to our collection. But in the book, it said that George Washington Carver invented peanut butter. And he did not. He didn't do it. So I could not add a book to our collection. And I also would pull a book from our collection, which shares this just to this day, misleading information. I did a report on George Washington Carver in the 3rd grade. I wore my mom's white robe as a lab coat. And if there is one thing that I will tell everyone at every gathering, because I'm that cool kid, he did not. So we got to move past that. So we don't want that material in our collection. We want to be reputable sharers of information in our community, and we can't be that or do that if our books have outdated and incorrect information in them that we are then passing along to our community members. Perhaps the material has been superseded by a newer edition. We see a lot of this in like the Cultures of the World's books in the 900s, as cultures, communities grow and change. And as we learn more about cultures, this is just sort of our example, and newer editions of books are published, perhaps debunking some older information that we might have had. We want to get that old information out of there. This is also a space in which maybe we decide to turn to and lean into the databases, like Research It that Brad mentioned, which is going to constantly have the most updated information available. And sometimes content is outdated, not just from an older information perspective, but fiction in particular, it's just not as popular anymore, right? Like there might be some communities that are still eating up Twilight, but some of us might have moved on. There might be some communities where you don't need 4 copies of every book in that series anymore because we've just, that level of popularity has passed. Some other criteria, we want to talk about the format of the book, right? So are the pages ripped? Is the spine, like are pages falling out of the spine? Is the glue so old that it just isn't doing its job anymore? There are some types of books, particularly in youth services, but adult services as well. And I think anyone who works with like the manga and graphic novels series or those types of books, sometimes that binding is just not great. And if those are books that are circulating at a rapid pace, it's not going to take long for them to fall apart. And some people just don't want to read a book that's been loved to oblivion by like every other member of the community. We want to get rid of those things. If coffee's been spilled on them, like I once had a kid leave a Magic Treehouse book in his treehouse, and then it rained and destroyed the book. I actually thought it was the cutest story in the entire world, but his mom made sure that he used his own allowance to replace the book because other kids didn't want to read a waterlogged edition of Magic Treehouse. Um, Oh, so I see in the chat someone's excited to finally pare down a couple copies of Where the Crawdads Sing. Yeah, when that movie came out, there was an explosion, and that's great. And if we can fill our shelves with enough books to fulfill our community's needs and do a little bit of resource sharing, how great! But like, whoo, goodness, we need that shelf space back. So yeah, so some of these are the things that we want to think about when this goes back to sometimes the look of our shelves really matter. And so we want to remove some of those things. And perhaps that means that we are replacing them. We've set aside a piece of our book budget for the replacement of popular books. This is really the space where you're going to want to lean into that when we're talking about the format of some of those titles. And finally, use. And from a perspective of use, we are talking about circulation. So when we dive a little deeper into the crew manual, we're going to be going through some, they technically are formulas, but approximately half of the circulation of a title is going to occur within the first 5-ish years of a book. So if you've got a title, particularly a fiction title, but also some sections of nonfiction, where the book has been on your shelves for 7, 8, 9 years, statistically, it might not have the same type of circulation numbers as it would have had within the first 5 years that it was in your library collection. So we're gonna go into sort of some of these formulas so that you can see exactly what it is that we're talking about. But again, within some portions of the collection, if it's in that first 3 to 5 years of a title, which does not seem like a long time, but when you think about all the books that are published like every Tuesday, they can go. So we are going to talk about a manual called the CREW manual, and CREW stands for continuous evaluation, continuous review, evaluation, weeding. And Brad actually mentioned that, right? It's not about one big giant weed that happens. This is a continuous and iterative process. I started working here in August, and Brad started working here a couple of months, not this past August. I mean, I'm saying in August of 2019. Brad started a few months after me in December. And once we kind of came back, we started and then it was COVID. But once we came back, essentially, Brad and I think have been weeding in this building for as long as we have been actively working in the building. You just move from section of the collection, from section to the collection. And the state library is multiple buildings. So at one point, we were weeding books that weren't even here in the service center, they were somewhere else. This is an iterative process. And so the CREW manual gives us an acronym that we can use when looking at individual books to consider them for weeding. And that acronym is MUSTY. Our M stands for misleading and inaccurate, something that we were talking about before when evaluating our titles. The U stands for ugly, but we're not just talking about what the cover looks like. We're talking about, those ripped pages, waterlogged coffee stains, pages falling out because of binding. That's what we're talking about. We got to get those out of here. Whether we just delete them or replace them, they've got to go. If it's superseded by newer or better works, we see a lot of that in something like the Cultures of the World series, for example. That's when we can decide, do we want to weed this book and replace it with a newer edition? Or perhaps this is somewhere where we can let our databases shine because they are always going to have the most updated information. If it is something that is trivial, where there's just like literally no merit, no literary merit, no scientific merit, we're not really sure how we got this book or what it's doing here or what its purpose is, maybe it can go, especially if it's also not really circulating, it can go. If it's irrelevant to the needs or interests of your communities, we've got some high need or high interest towns here in Connecticut. Groton, submarine capital of the world, very big into submarines over there. We've got Sikorsky with all of its like airplane parts. So if we've got a sort of section or collection of books that just like don't really fit within our community, like the interest just isn't in our space, maybe it's time to let them go. And then also, can it be found elsewhere? And that was like our first slide. We were talking about the myriad of resources, find it, deliver it, all the resource sharing opportunities that we are really lucky to have here in this small but mighty state, so that we can get access to almost anything that we need in this state in just a few business days. So we don't have to be Amazon. We don't have to have every book, every topic, everything on our shelves, because we are very lucky that we can get it from somewhere else in a relatively short period of time for free. And so for some of us, I feel like librarians split into two camps, right? Like you either love getting rid of everything or you really struggle to get rid of everything. And then we all have those beloved Princess Diaries, boxcar children, right? That's really hard for us to get rid of. But at the end of the day, right, they're just books. Like we are librarians, so they are beloved to us and they are beloved in general, but in the grand scheme of things, like it's it's okay. It's okay if it's time to get the book out of our library or if it's so destroyed that it just needs to go into recycling. Um, just kind of like the end of this quote that's here that you will be able to sort of sit with and evaluate when we share these slides out. But more than anything else, I'm finished with the idea that books can, just by virtue of their existence, are precious things that can never outlive their usefulness. Socks and shoes can outlive their usefulness, right? Food goes bad, and that's something that we need to live. Like it is ultimately, at the end of the day, okay to get rid of books. Love them though we might. So let's talk a little bit about the crew method and those formulas that we said didn't exist, but they kind of exist. But like it's okay to adjust them, right? That's what we're looking at here. So there is a page ultimately in the crew manual. It's page 105. The reality is you're gonna know it when you see it. It's at the end of the manual where it breaks down all these formulas, and it'll give you a code, a formula for deeper things to look at when you are in a particular section of nonfiction in particular. So for example, they will give you on this like one sheeter, they'll give you the 610s of Dewey. Obviously, the numbers are going to be different if you're at an academic library or using the Library of Congress subject headings, or you have some other method, but we're talking about medicine, right? So which is the 610s of Dewey. And the crew method suggests 3, 5, musty. So that 3 is the age of the book. How old is it? Depending on the different sections of the book, that first number is going to be different. Medicine changes rapidly and quickly. We all learned a lot during COVID, something that none of us had been alive to see, and it has changed the way we talk about medicine and medical care. So 5 years, if it's older than that and it's in the 610s, almost irrelevant of anything else, you're gonna want to really consider getting rid of it because of the changes in medicine. That 3 stands for circ. If it hasn't circulated in the last 3 years, you're really gonna want to consider getting rid of it. And again, we go back to that musty. If the book fits into any of those letters of the acronym, it's ripped, it's whatever, then you're gonna want to consider getting rid of it. So now let's compare the 610s, the medicine section, to the OOs, 004, which is for computers. Computers change even more rapidly than medicine. I went to bed with a Samsung and woke up and they had appled my Samsung. I don't know why they did that to me, but I essentially woke up and could barely use this phone anymore because they appled it. They did something. So when we're talking about, and ultimately phones are small computers that you just so happen to be able to, call your siblings on. So if the book is older than 3 years, right? Which is a sort of a different look than medicine. You're gonna want to consider getting rid of it regardless of anything else because of how quickly computer information and technology changes. The reason that this has an X here, this is what this example is for, is because it's saying circulation doesn't matter. We do not care if it circed yesterday. You really might want to consider getting rid of it. I don't know about you all, but I haven't opened like Windows 95 for Dummies in a real long time because it's just because we're beyond that now. So these are two examples of what those formulas are could look like and are going to look like in the crew method, and how to read them if you are actively in the stacks. And so there are also sort of random guidelines. It's a pretty big manual, but it's actually very quick and easy to read because it's broken up by sections. But there are some technologies, there are some sections of a collection that just have super, super fast changing fields, such as AI, need I say more, infectious disease, green technologies, environmentalism, that almost like weekly something new changes. The default guide for those portions of the collection are 2 years old. We don't care about the circulation and that musty acronym. So again, here's a link to, and you'll all have this, so don't worry, a link to the where you can access the crew manual yourself. I have a printed copy of it. I still actively use it when I'm in the stacks. And it's the new crew manual. New is code for like over 10 years. The new version of this still came out in 2012, but it's still really good. We are still actively using this. It added a few subject head areas. Some of the text changed. It added that chart on page 105 with a list of those suggested sort of formulas. A few simple changes that aren't new anymore. We should probably change the name of this slide, but we still call it the new crew method. And there are a few like special sections in the crew manual. Reference, as Brad mentioned, is kind of a unique space. Non-print material, which we are going to touch base on, and children's, and we're going to touch base on all of those on future slides. And so what would I not read? Like what do I sort of want to put a halt on before deciding to handle? Local history and interest, as I mentioned, right? Submarine capital of the world, Sikorsky. There's like, who knows what's in the Yale libraries. Some things that are of local interest, we might not want to weed those. We might want to hold on to them. We might want to look into our local historical society, but just with things like that, we're going to want to pause, and we're going to want to reconsider before just diving into our weeding process with those types of things. Also, rare items. Rare does not always mean old. Like old and rare are two different words with two different meanings. But rare items, again, maybe the folks in Hartford, the State Library building in Hartford, we're going to want to pause with those and maybe not follow our normal weeding procedures. Material that's out of print or maybe irreplaceable that holds some sort of like educational or literary value. So we might want to reconsider sort of following our weeding procedures with those, and materials that have some research value, which you'll most likely find in academic libraries. But because we're here in New England, we've got a lot of old stuff in our basement. So just those are some of the things that, take a beat before following our weeding procedures with those.
So another area you want to focus on are ebooks. And this is something in terms of policy and guidance, it's evolving. There is a section of the crew manual that does discuss ebooks. But just based on my experience over the last few years and all the changes with ebook licenses that have occurred, I've started thinking a little bit differently about sort of the negativity associated with ebook licenses because they seem punitive sometimes. They're only 1 year. They're a little expensive. Maybe they're 2 years, but they're very limiting. And sometimes that is a problem, and sometimes it can be actually a good thing. The Palace Marketplace, when I purchase from them, they typically have multiple types of licenses. So I can pick the license that suits my need. So perhaps I want to buy something that is new and popular. And I might want to get multiple copies. So I might want to get one copy that is a little bit longer of a license or perpetual ownership, and then get some short 1 year licenses to support the demand. And then automatically, your collection will be weeded because at the end of 1 year, all those licenses with that duration will disappear. So your shelves, your virtual shelves, suddenly get cleaned up without you having to do anything. So the point I think I want to make is that obviously a physical print bookshelf and a virtual bookshelf are very different things. And so you want to come up with policies that sort of articulate what you want to do with both your print collection and your ebook collection. And again, ebook licenses are something you want to think about as you go through that process. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about getting out there and doing the work, how to get it done. So in terms of when you are going to do this, the when, um, we've said over and over again, this is not something you can do 1 week a year or 1 month a year. It's way too big and way too important. So you want to set priorities and actually schedule time for reading and for shelf reading as well, for that matter. You want to, if possible. I was given the luxury of being in the library building for 2 hours before we opened every day when I worked in a public library. So I would actually get into the stacks and do my shelf reading and my weeding at that time. And I scheduled it for at least once a week. So I was always in the stacks. It was a constant process because it helped me also with my collection development work because I was ordering books all the time. So to not be in the collection and to try to order books can be a little bit of a challenge. So it's super helpful to do it on a regular basis. Um, the idea of shelf reading prior to weeding is something I think is super important. It saves you lots of time. One of the things that you might be able to do is work with your circulation department and enlist their help in doing the shelf reading. Typically, it was a little bit of a hybrid. I think when I first started in a public library, I had to do both the shelf reading and the weeding. But as time went by, I think we worked with the circulation department and we happened to have enough staff that they could actually do the shelf reading prior to me getting in there. So that was super helpful. So, work as a team, do what you can to work with the staff that you have and see if they can jump in and help. If you're going to be doing an inventory, you can actually weed and shelf read for that matter in conjunction with an inventory. One of the things about doing an inventory, if your shelf reading has been accomplished, the inventory goes a lot easier. But one thing about an inventory is that as you're going through, you will identify materials that no longer have the value that they once did for whatever reason. They might be old, it might be conditioned. And take it in small doses. Don't get, again, the month of March is going to be dedicated to weeding mentality does not work. So take it in small doses. I mean, I always found it to be kind of relaxing, enjoyable, and it always taught me something about the collection when I got in there and shelf read or weeded. So take it in small doses, make it enjoyable, and do it across, each month of the year, each week. I would actually get in there throughout the year and work on it. The other thing is if you're going to have a construction project coming up at your library that's going to impact your space, and it may limit the space that you have for books, or it may mean that you have to move things for a while, you want to do your reading before that construction event. Um, One of the things I said we had to do when I worked in a public library is do a major reading of the fiction collection because we needed to create space. And that was really uh, labor intensive. And again, I think we probably could have used a little bit more time. So you want to always be sort of, talking with the team and looking at the future and looking if there's going to be a project coming up that's going to impact you that way. You want to take care of it. And the other thing is you don't want to have to be in a situation where you actually have to box up books, find storage for them, and then once the project is done, get them out of storage and back on the shelf. That's expensive, it's time consuming, and it can really add to the challenges and the stress of a renovation project. So it's definitely recommended that you get out there and weed beforehand if possible. Next
And
slide.
to just sort of quickly add to that, Brad mentioned our director of CT Lab, Matt Giza. He was hired a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure how many of you know this. The service center has large print books, but those large print books used to be housed in a building in Rocky Hill, which is where CT Lab and its staff worked. Before we brought Matt on, we knew that we would be moving CT Lab into this building in the service center. And we had to go through many, many, many shelves of large print books and do a big weeding project to get those large print books to a size and capacity where we could move them here into the service center. And at the same time, we had to weed the collection here. We did the professional collection in the service center to make space for the books that we were moving from Rocky Hill into this building at the same time, cleaning out the small meeting room, which now houses CT Lab. So I just wanted to use that as an example to say, like, we did this. Like, you know, like we're not trying to be sort of talking heads, right? Just sort of out of touch, and don't know what we're talking about. And we are a small staff. We had, it was, I think, me, Brad, and Maria were really the folks who were spearheading this. Other folks came in and helped in Rocky Hill, but it was a very small staff of people who organized this, managed the weeding of two collections and a space to get a new collection and people into this building on top of our jobs as library consultants serving the 190 public libraries in the state. So if anyone is beginning to feel overwhelmed, I just want to tell you, like, we did it. We made it work. You can too. How do you eat? What is it, an elephant or a dinosaur? One bite at a time. What a really weird analogy, but like it kind of fits here. So just like we feel you. If anyone's feeling a little overwhelmed, it's okay. Can be done.
And that's like a lightning weed is what I call it. And you're going through, and that's when you hope you have great team members to work with to accomplish that task. But we did sort of modify our weeding objectives and sort of the policy that we used for that specific case. So you can modify your policy and procedures for weeding based on the situation. So always keep that in mind. Next slide, Kim. So let's talk about the who a little bit. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of like having a way to describe to patrons, to board members, to friends of the library, to anyone who might question city officials actually as well, why you're weeding. So you want to have basically like it's one of those things where you always think about the elevator speech. I want to be able to quickly, concisely articulate why we weed. So you want to make sure that everyone on staff is able to really articulate the importance and the value of weeding so they can share that information and not misspeak when they're talking to someone in the community. The other thing is, and Kim and I can vouch for this, is work with a buddy. If you work with someone, it makes the whole process so much more enjoyable. It divides the labor that needs to be accomplished. So that's a huge thing. It's 50% is being done by, a colleague. You also get to bounce ideas off each other. And, if you're vacillating about whether something should be taken off the shelf or not, you can say, hey, what do you think about this? So you can kind of share ideas and work together like that. So that's really helpful. And it makes it just a lot more fun. I mean, in my experience, if you can work and have some back and forth about what you're doing and have some laughs and some camaraderie, it makes the whole process much more enjoyable. But also, you double your level of expertise, which is great too. There are sections of the library that have collections that you're not going to be an expert on, and there are experts out there. So when I was working in a public library, as I mentioned earlier, I was in charge of the 300. So that includes the law books. So I was able to go reach out to the folks at the Judicial Library, which was just around the corner from my library, and they came over and they helped me go through the collection. So I prepared a whole bunch of questions about different items. I was having trouble with. And then they also just went through the collection and sort of tagged things that I either should keep or that you might want to think about getting rid of this. Their expertise was pivotal, essential, and really saved me a lot of stress. So there are also librarians at UConn that can provide guidance for your 600s, for your medical books, and so on. That's so helpful because you sometimes just don't have the expertise in a particular area to. It's not like you don't try to make good decisions, but you don't have the confidence, and they give you the confidence to make the best decisions for your collection. So definitely take advantage of that assistance. Um, when you do go through, sometimes when you're doing a weeding project, maybe you're not the only person weeding in your particular area of responsibility. But you want to be the one, if you are the selector in that area, you want to be the one that makes the final decision about what's weeded. So definitely come up with a mechanism that allows you to review everything that's taken off the shelf, whether you do it or whether somebody else does it. And then consider developing guidelines for support staff and volunteers to follow when shelving. And the reason this is important is because they're sometimes in the stacks every single day. And they might see that item that maybe you missed because you weeded an area a few months ago and now you're further along in the collection and they may find something that is in terrible shape or maybe something that's really not appropriate to have in the collection anymore and because it's out of date and it needs to be updated, but they can pull those books for you and give you an opportunity to review them and then decide whether they should be actually pulled off, replaced, whatever the case may be. So take advantage of your team that's in the stacks every day as much as you can. Next slide. So now when you actually get out there and you get in the stacks, you got to find what works best for you. So I want to just say that before I get into what worked for me, but I will tell you what worked for me. First of all, having access to the circulation records. I brought a computer and I could access the ILS. I could look at the last checkout, the number of checkouts, the date that it was added to the collection. All that information was super helpful to me. We don't necessarily have the due date slip that you can refer to anymore. So having the circulation records on a computer kind of fills that gap. You do want to have a book truck. For me, a book truck was a desk. It was my work area. So I used the top basically for my work area, and then the books that I was pulling off the shelf to consider for deletion, I put underneath. Have a copy of the crew manual available. Then you don't want to come home at night and read the crew manual. It's not enjoyable in that way. But when you have a practical use and it's applied, this is just a great work and it helps you so much when you're trying to do your weeding. So if you have a copy, whether it's on your computer or print it out and keep it with you, just so you can reference it as you're going through. If you have questions, the crew manual can probably give you a good answer. So have a copy of that with you, whether, like I said, it's a digital format or a print copy. The other thing is, I don't know if libraries still have a lot of the old card catalogs, but one side is blank. So I used to always have a bunch of those cards with me to make notes about something because sometimes I was definitely wanting to pull something off the shelf. I wasn't 100% sure, so I would want to make some notes about it, about why am I thinking this way? I'm going to pull it from the shelf, but I know when I actually go to delete this and to look at my next purchase to fill the gap I'm creating, the notes might be helpful in helping me make decisions as I go through the process. Along with this, a weeding slip is super helpful. And so the weeding slips, should basically have a workflow almost and a decision tree that you can use to describe why you may want to keep something or why you may want to let something go. And we'll talk a little bit more about weeding slips as we go through. And Kim obviously showed you Musty, which is very critical to this process and kind of gives you different areas to evaluate as you make a decision. And then, as I said in the beginning, to have a computer or tablet with you to access the online catalog or your search system, your ILS. That's really important for you to have as well. Next slide. So here is the weeding slip, and as I said, this is something that you want to put a copy of in each and every one of the books that you're going to consider for withdrawal or repair or replace, depending on what you want to do. So this is something that helps you if you have to look at it, say in 2 weeks. It also might help if you're weeding in someone else's area. And we did sometimes work as teams when I was in a public library. And obviously, Kim and I work as a team all the time when we get into the weeding process. So you may want to have justification for why you are recommending something be withdrawn, replaced, or repaired. So this slip is really key to sort of track your decision making and your recommendation. And it helps, again, you may get sidetracked and have a cart that is 2 or 3 weeks old and you forget, what was my logic behind this? Well, this will provide it for you. Next slide. And now let's talk about the how. We've talked about this a little bit, but you really want to get in the collection. You want to pull every item off the shelf. You want to look at it. You want to see if it's been edited, if it's been damaged. Again, you want to consider circulation, age, publication date is critical as well. You want to look at it if you know a little bit about the title, the subject. Is it dated? Is it somehow inaccurate? Those are all things that you want to think about. And you want to look at the format as well as the condition. As you're going through, you want to consider what information about this contained within this title, I should say, has been changed, has been updated. If it's inaccurate in any way, shape, or form, you really want to pull it from your shelves. You want accurate, reliable information on your shelves. We do say here to check the standard catalogs. I think this is a little bit of an older way of looking at things. To me, circulation is probably one of the most important things. You can also check to see if it's in the Find It, the state union catalog. That's another thing you do. You can use these standard catalogs as they might help you. You don't want to use them to the point that it bogs you down and makes the process so arduous. So use it as needed, but I don't think you need to use it on every title. That's for sure. And again, look in the Find It catalog and also look at if you're in a consortium, look at your nearby libraries, see if they have it, see if it's available in other places, because that does factor into your decision-making process as well. Next slide. So when you're actually just getting into what do I do with this? For each item removed, as I said before, you want to put a weeding slip in the book with your decision. You want to make sure it's actually deleted from the catalog. And the other thing I know that we have to do at the Middletown Library Service Center is we also have to get that OCLC number because we want to remove it from WorldCat. We don't want people going into WorldCat and thinking that the item is at our location. So because sometimes that's what people use. Whether your holdings are in WorldCat or not, that's something that will affect your decision, obviously. But for us, we have to actually get that OCLC number so that we can delete from WorldCat. And then you want to make sure that you stamp it withdrawn or discarded, and you want to remove identifying information, that it will belong to your library. So as much as possible, you want to remove, any stickers that say your library name, and you want to make sure that it's very clearly marked that it's been withdrawn. Otherwise, sometimes they wind up back on your shelves. Believe it or not, that's happened to me. So you want to make sure you clearly identify it as a discarded book. And then you dispose of this according to your policy. And we're going to talk more about disposal methods kind of as we go along in the presentation. Next slide. This is kind of fun, and it's something that we did when I worked in a public library, and that's have a last chance display. And you can put this in sort of a prominent place. So, sometimes books are hidden and people don't see them. So you want to get it out there so people can, get a look at it and see if they're still interested in it. We would put it near the new books or near the reference desk or near the circulation desk. And it allowed staff to interact with people as they were looking at it, but it gives these books another chance to be loved. And sometimes when we have that sentimental attachment to the book, this is a good route to go. Because if it doesn't circulate in a while, then you're like, okay, I know, I have to let it go. It's time for this book to be, put into the sunset. So, but it is a great way to kind of alleviate the guilt you feel about removing a book if you do happen to be subject to that, because I know that I am sometimes. Next slide. So rare books, are these books rare? Are they valuable? You know what? In most cases, they're not. Um, Library books are heavily used. They get beat up. They have all sorts of markings on them. I actually love to collect signed books, signed first editions. Um, it, any book I have, I know if it's been damaged in any way, sometimes in just a minor way, the value drops immensely. So library books typically are not very valuable. We have some places that you can look at, and the links are here to see if something does have some value. If a book is so rare that a library book is kind of the only copy you can find, that's when it may actually have some value. But you want to check these different sites. eBay is always good to check. Bookfinder I've used for years. So these different links are things you can check on just to see if your book might actually have some value. Again, this adds another layer to the process. So be selective in the titles that you check on. Out of 100 books, if one book is something that you're checking on, that would probably be a lot. Next slide. So, how do we dispose of these books? You definitely want to do the most sustainable thing when you get rid of books. So, think of other ways to repurpose it. Can you sell it? Is the Friends group doing a library book sale? Can you use one of the online services to sell it? Um, can you work with someone who will sell the books for you? I know Maria gave an example when she was working with us of a consigner who basically sold the books that they provided and gave 50% back to the library, which was just wonderful. If you can get that deal, jump on it. That's a great way to get rid of books and also bring some revenue into your library. You can give it away. And this is something that we're always working on at the Middletown Library Service Center. When we read something, we try to be creative, think about other places we might be able to have this book have another life. So, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, prisons, the international market. Again, you don't want to send junk, but if something still has value, you want to see if you can share it. The other thing is you could use a free cart, and you might want to get this on the other side of the security gate because it can cause confusion sometimes, or have it near the circulation desk so people can sort of advise you, hey, yeah, that's a free one. You can definitely take that to go. But a free cart is a good way to give a book another life. And patrons sometimes really appreciate that and like to take, a book that they don't have to return. So recycling is also very important. We're all about sustainability. So, check to see if locally you can recycle books. There are definitely organizations that will take books. Um, Also, repurposing is another way to recycle. So if you can use it for a book art program in your library, go ahead and do that. You do a nice make and take, and again, that book has another life. So that's a great way to do it. When all else fails, you're going to have to basically throw the book away. Again, you want to remove all markings from the item, and don't be overt. You don't want to sort of rub people's noses in the fact that you're getting rid of books. One weeding project I was involved in, it was so big that we ended up having a dumpster in the back of the library. And it was a bad decision because everybody was surprised that we had that many books that we were getting rid of from the library, even though we had a huge collection. And we actually had people jumping into the dumpster and trying to take books from the dumpster after we had done that. So you want to be discreet and responsible in the way that you basically dispose of these books as best you can. Next slide. So here are some resources that we have that you can take a look at to basically come up with your best method of disposal. And you really want to have a policy for this. Have maybe a seven things. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Better World Books obviously is a great way to get rid of books that end up giving the books a new life. I know that we're doing a weeding of the large print collection right now, and I think over 50% of the books are being accepted by Better World, which is wonderful. Um, you know, there's different places that you can give them away to, as we mentioned. Next slide. And one thing I want to talk about is Kim and I thought we had won the lottery. Uh, Baker and Taylor had set up a program called Sustainable Shelves. And Kim and I found out about that. Kim got it all set up in a wonderful way. And um, we started sending them lots of stuff. And I think success actually caused the program to fail in a way because I think they were overwhelmed with materials. They would pay for some materials, they were the green items, and they would actually pay you for those, and then they would recycle the rest for you. And that was just such a gift that like I said, we took advantage of it as much as we could. The program has now changed. They only accept the green titles, so those are titles that they're willing to pay you for. We're lucky because Kim made a decision that she thought whatever funds we get should be put back into our collection, but into our ebook collection. So it's part of Ego, and it goes into books that you can get at the Palace Project app. So we take that money and buy ebooks, which I think is a wonderful use of those funds. I have a bias there, obviously, but it definitely helps us out. So we still use that program, but we're not able to get rid of as many books. So, when you see a good program, jump on it, take advantage of it, because it really does enhance sustainability. But there's lots of resources here that you can take advantage of. Next slide, Kim.
Hey, this is me. And as an ebook, an e-audio lover, I am also a little biased. I'm so glad that even though um, we're not able to use that particular program the way that we once could, we have still found another location that will take a good amount of books that are still in an okay condition, and then we get a little bit of extra funds to go into our ebook and e-audiobook platform. So I mentioned that there were some special areas of a collection when going through that portion of the library with weeding on the mind. So we're going to go into a few of those. So the first one is children's fiction. Do we weed that the same way, right? Like, what are some of the things that we want to take into consideration? Is the book still popular? As we know, trends and things within children's fiction come and go. Sometimes they come and hang around for a long time. I think a really great example of that is Minecraft. Minecraft came and exploded in the children's space. We even had Minecraft servers at libraries that I worked at for kids to play with, and of course, with that came books. And then while Minecraft never lost its popularity completely, there was a shift. And with the resurgence of the Minecraft movie, I imagine it's kind of starting all over again. So those are some of the things that we want to think about with regards to the books that we keep in the collection. Has its popularity waned? And what does that mean for those books, right? In children's fiction, we really have to be careful of some of the older books, but unfortunately, sometimes they're not so old, just sort of questionable decisions were made. Do the books have stereotypes that we are concerned about sharing with members of our community, especially if the stereotypes allude to things that just aren't true, right? So as libraries and library spaces, we want to share accurate information. So sometimes in books that misportray groups of people, it's sharing misinformation. And those are things that we don't want to get into the hands of our youngest patrons because they truly believe in the information that they get from a library. If a third grader, right, gets a book from a library, they're more likely to believe that everything in that book is true because we are a trusted space of information for them. So we really want to be careful with that. Children's books have a lot of awards, so many. We have a whole day of youth media awards. Do we need all of them? Like, do we need every children's book award ever in all of award times? Like, I don't know. Nutmegs are really, really, really old. I don't know that we need, you know, 1 or 3 or 5 copies of every book that has ever won a nutmeg ever, especially when we take into consideration, again, that resource sharing possibility that's available here. Just because it won an award does not necessarily mean that it is still in high demand, or something that's of interest to the members of our community. So it might be time to let it go. And children's books, some of those picture books in particular, the bindings I were maybe not meant for like libraries, right? Like maybe some of the way these books were bound were meant for personal libraries, and not for potentially hundreds of little hands to touch and utilize, whether they're checking them out at home or reading through them in the library. So sometimes it's not that a book isn't in high demand, it's just that it's been loved to literal pieces. So we've got to get rid of it, and that might mean replacing it, but we don't want it on our shelves anymore. Our books are also a portrayal of us and what we value in libraries. So, you know, if so many of our children's books are just falling apart, we don't want to accidentally portray the thought that like we don't value this collection. So, I mean, it is a bit of a physical thing, right? Like, who cares? But you know, we never know who's in our shelves and who's looking and what they might think. So we just want to keep that in consideration. And those children's books can and are sometimes loved to literal pieces. Young adult books are pretty similar. With young adult books, you really, really lock into that 5 year time frame that we mentioned before, and sometimes less. Sometimes the young adult book trend it'll hit hard, it'll hit fast, and then we'll blink and we're never talking about it again. We don't know when it happened or where it happened, but just like we all stopped caring at the same time. So we really want to lock into those Y books that we purchased because they were a high trend in the youth field, and now they're not. That might mean that 5 year mark, but really sometimes it might be a year and a half to 2 years, depending on what it is. Teens in particular, myself included, I'm not a teen, but in this sense, maybe I am, will judge a cover so hard. That's why some of our old classics were reprinted. Like I remember the reprint of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys to sort of modernize the covers. I think they did the same thing with the American Girl books to sort of modernize some of the covers for like the new youths. So sometimes, you know, those are things that should be considered. It's not that the story isn't good or even like the topic might not be might not be like it might still be like a hot and interesting topic, but if that cover doesn't look right, if the cover looks like it was made in the 80s because the book was made in the 80s, they're not going to read it. So those are some of the vanity things that we want to pay attention to because they're just a reality. Again, is the fad over, right? Are we over Twilight? I don't even know. But you know, those are things you want to keep into consideration as well. I was always a Morganville vampire girl myself, but Twilight came, it did what it did. Um, so we want to consider that as well. And also, is there still a demand for the series? Series books get really interesting, especially those longer series, sort of towing that middle grade, young adult line. Like the 39 Clues is like a super long series, and you know we've got other things like that. So sometimes how we keep these books on our shelves matter. Maybe at one point we had 3 or 4 copies of the first 5 books or 3 books in a series because see this in the schools a lot because just so many kids are reading the book at the same time that you need, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 copies of the first 5 books in a series. But as time progresses, maybe it's still a series that kids are reading, but maybe you no longer need so many copies of book 2 and 3 and 4, right? You might be able to get away with 3 copies of the first book in a series. And then we can tap into some of that resource sharing if kids decide they want to continue reading the book. So we really want to take a closer look at our series um, in um, children's books and young adult books. Now, picture books. Boy, oh boy. I mentioned that books are loved to literal pieces. Picture books take the cake with that. For any of my youth people in the room, I'm not sure how many of you there are. I don't know if Karma Wilson is still as popular with you all as he is up here in the service center and at my last public library. But there was a time where every single page of a Karma Wilson book had book tape on it, where it was so loved, and we would just do it like one page at a time. A kid would come up, Miss Kim, the page is coming out. I think we need a little tape. We sure do. Tape one page, and then right the next day, it's a different page before the entire book is being held together with like hope, tape, and paper clips. It happens so quickly with these picture books because so many of them are taken at a time, and they are just beloved by our littlest hands. We don't want to, if we can help it. Not every library has the same type of funding, but if we can help it, we really don't want our books to look like that. We want to just sort of put a better foot forward if we can. That's when doing things like, borrowing from the service center can come in handy, because we do lend our books for 3 months at a time. So you can almost have like a bit of a rotating collection that's updated quarterly, so that we can keep newer books in our collection that are just sort of in a bit of a better condition. Um, and we also sort of, in the picture book space, we're gonna want to weed. Picture books have popularity just like the older kids' books do. At one point there was no Bluey. Now Bluey is everywhere. One day Bluey may go off and do something else, right? And that might mean that it's time to get rid of those Bluey books. There were Blues Clues books once upon a time, and we don't really have those anymore, even though the millennials of us will always love Steve. There's popularity within the picture book space, from fads and movies and TV shows and things like that, just like there are with the older kids. So we're really going to want to keep our eyes on those as well. And sometimes those fads come and go just as quickly as they do with like teenage vampire books. And then we're going to want to basically follow the same guidelines for youth nonfiction as we do for youth fiction, right? These kids are going to put a lot of value and belief in the titles that they take from the library. They trust us as a source of accurate and vital information. So if we give them a book and they make a solar system and they have Pluto in there in a way in which she should no longer be, if a third grader dresses up as George Washington Carver, holding up a jar of Skippy, that poor kid's going to get a bad grade, and it's not going to be our fault. That's heavy, but they will have been given misinformation on accident because we're too nervous, right, to get rid of some of our books that are ultimately misinforming and miseducating these kids. And we want to remain trusted sources of information and literature. We don't want them losing trust in us because we've got just some old books that we weren't able to get off the shelves and we didn't notice that they took.
All right, let's get into fiction a little bit. So this is adult fiction we're talking about, and if you think about fiction, you think it's one thing. Well, it's not. It's sci-fi, it's fantasy, it's mystery, it's thrillers. There's so much contained in the fiction area that so you need a little bit of a thought process as you're going through this, and get help if you can. But always, 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 circulation is key. Kim has said that over and over again. I'm saying it over and over again. Circulation tells you so much about the value of the shelf space for a particular item. Another thing to factor in is duplicate copies. With fiction, you probably buy more duplicate copies than any other area. And this is something where you don't want to forget that you bought 8 copies of the latest James Patterson and let them take up all the space on the shelf for years to come, especially when there's multiple titles. I think he publishes a book pretty much every week. So, there's so much damage that can do to your shelf space if you don't take care of it. So you always want to make sure you're going through and looking at usage and determining, I can live with 1 copy, maybe 2 copies, but I don't need 8. And so that takes a lot off your shelf. and obviously create space. Um, Items that are a series. So, if something is a series that's still active, you want to probably keep the whole series. It becomes important. You want to factor in the fact, is the author still writing? Sometimes when an author isn't writing anymore and you're not adding to the series becomes less of interest. And in fact, you can look at the circulation and see that maybe I don't have to keep any of these on the shelf anymore. Um, there are exceptions to that, obviously. Someone like J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings is always going to be something, so it seems, that people want. He hasn't written anything in a long time because he's been passed away for a long time. So, but the interest is still there. So, it's not always the case, but sometimes if an author is no longer writing, no longer contributing, that people do sort of understand that, hey, you know what, we don't want this anymore. Um, this is something that, it's, you have to have a little knowledge of what you're looking at. Um, but if the style and the, setting is really dated, it just doesn't read well, people aren't going to be understanding or interested in it anymore, you might want to take it away. And again, circulation will help you make that decision. But sometimes books just aren't, they're not relevant anymore. So you might, in the fiction area especially, and so you might want to take them off the shelf. Condition is critical. As Kim has said over and over again, sometimes something is so well loved, it actually shows how much people do love it and how much we need it. You want to get the copy that's in bad condition off the shelf, and if circulation merits it, you want to replace that copy. The other thing is being on a desk, circulation, reference, children's, wherever you are, you get feedback from your patrons. So if people are still asking about a genre, that makes you probably think about it a little bit differently. And again, circulation will back it up if it's important and of interest to your community. But definitely consider that and get feedback from your colleagues about that as best you can, because our interactions at the desk talking to patrons, there's a lot of data coming in that can be taken advantage of. So definitely bring that in and have it added into your whole decision making process. And then, as you're making a choice about removing something, maybe your circ numbers on something are a little bit low and you're like, should I take it off the shelf or not? Check to see if maybe, hey, the neighboring library or other libraries in the state of Connecticut have it. It might be something that could be easily retrieved through interlibrary loan, or the patron can go over to the next town and using their library card and the borrowed system, they can check it out there. So definitely factor all of that in. But again, I think the bottom line for this is, circulation is key. A lot of titles definitely lose, that fad issue that Kim was talking about with some of the YA titles. Happens with adult titles too. And certain classics will be a little bit different. You want to think about them differently, obviously. But the more fad titles, interest is high for a while and then it wanes. So definitely remove those things that are no longer of interest to your community. Next slide. So there is an article written by Rebecca Vanook that is linked there, and I recommend that you take a look at it. And it kind of goes into to weeding and expands upon what we're talking about today. The article is very brief. It's very concise. It kind of covers relevancy, currency, appeal, browsability of your collection, accessibility of your collection. Kind of covers all those areas, and it's a quick read. If you want more information, though, we have a print copy of her book, which covers the same information, but in a much more expanded format. And it's also available in the Palace app. So do take advantage of that. It's a great article and an even better book. So do take advantage of that if you'd like to learn more. Next slide. So graphic novels and manga, obviously they're a little bit similar to fiction. They get used, I think, in a different way, though. A lot of times when I worked in a public library, they were used in-house. They were used and they were used in a very hard way. So they would get beaten up really quick. The way that they were bound was much sort of cheaper. They weren't meant to be permanent. They were meant to be sort of utilized for a while and then go away. So that's something that will impact, the look of your collection and whether you want to keep something on the shelf. Obviously Same old story with duplicates. If there's major interest in it, you want to make sure you have multiple copies. But if the interest is limited, still meriting maybe one or two copies, remove all the other duplicates, save the best ones. Go through, look at them, make sure they're not torn, written in, stained, in bad shape. Whatever one's in the best shape, keep that one. Obviously, again, as we always say, circulation is a main driver as to whether you want to keep something, and it especially applies here. Condition to me is really important as well, but circulation is obviously critical. Um, because of the way these, graphic novels and especially manga are published, sometimes you will get gaps in the series. Um, and they're not always completable because the publisher may no longer be creating that. So you want to look at the gaps that you have and decide, do we want to keep what what's here, the few copies we have. We're missing volume 2 and volume 3, but we have all the other ones 1 through 6. So do we keep it? And you might want to look at neighboring libraries. Does your neighboring library have the ones that you're missing? Can you even work together to say, hey, maybe I'll give you copies of volume 1, 2, 3, and 5 because you're missing them, and then we have a whole set, and we'll just agree that we will make it a priority to lend that to our patrons amongst each other. You can sort of look at it in a creative way, but the gaps in the series are definitely sometimes a challenge because of the sort of transitory nature of some of the publishers of these titles. You won't be able to rebuild the collection and get the series back in shape. Next slide. So reference, I've talked a little bit about reference already, and the challenges and unique opportunities that it presents. But one of the key things is, many libraries have a suite of databases that they share with their patrons. Think about the databases that you have, and then also the 38 databases that the state provides in research at CT. So much of the information in your reference collection is duplicated in research it, and it can really help you make a decision when you want to take something off the shelf in your reference collection. You know that it's being backed up and it's more up to date and timely and accurate in research it than it might be on your shelf. So consider that. Are you also getting new additions regularly? There were a lot of things that we had in our reference collection when I worked in a public library that you would, every month, every quarter, sometimes once a year, you would get updates and newer editions. Sometimes they stop. And if you're not getting new editions on a regular basis, you want to look at the old ones and say, do I still want to keep these? Is it still relevant and useful to my patrons? And one of the ways that you can tell if it is observations of use. So you want to look at what people are taking off the shelves and utilizing. And so one of the ways that we did it when I worked in a public library is we didn't always use the count use function in our ILS, but what we did is we would take all the reference materials, put them on a separate cart. All of the selectors would then go to that cart, and in our case, we would reshelve those materials. So we would see what patrons were using. Even if you don't want it to be set up in such a way that you have to reshelve them, before they get reshelved, have or provide the opportunity for that selector to look at what's being utilized. So you just get a sense of what's still popular. Patron use is the key because you're not getting those circ stats that you get with your circulating collection. And then again, always review your crew manual for guidance. When it's something that's a little bit different, something that's unique, your encyclopedias and almanacs, etc. You can find specific guidance in the crew manual there. Next slide. All right, other formats. This is another one where when I was talking about ebooks before, I think things are evolving. So things are changing when you look at AV materials, for example. And you always have to consider, is the format still popular? Is it even possible? Kim and I talk all the time about, we used to always listen to books on CD. I mean, I actually listened to books on tape in my car when I had a cassette player. And then, you buy a car and suddenly there's no CD player. So that format for people starts to become a little bit of a challenge. So you want to factor that in to your process. Um, the other thing is they're moving to other platforms. They're available in other mediums. So, the books on CD that we're basically evaluating at the Middletown Library Service Center right now, we're also saying, well, hey, we have similar or exact content available in the Palace app. So, there are ways to get at this. So it's moved from one format to another. That's going to allow me to say, you know what, I can get rid of this now. The other thing is condition. Think about VHS tapes. I used to always find, back in the day, we had people that still were utilizing them, but they would break down. The tape would get ripped, and suddenly the tape would break, whatever it might be. We had many issues with them, and so you just had to say, you know what, it's gone, it's done, it's served its purpose. And then what we might do is look at it. Hey, it was really popular, let's get it as a DVD or a Blu-ray. So, there's different ways to handle that, but they do break down. And here's the thing about time management. So you're suddenly looking at something, and you're wondering if you should keep it, and you would have to view or listen to the item to make sure that it's still in working condition. This can take a lot of time. So you want to be selective. You want to make sure if you're going to take that time and invest that time into listening to it, it's something you actually want to keep. Um, get feedback from your patrons when they return something. Make it easy for them to tell you, hey, disc 7 didn't work. Just so that you have that input and you don't have to go through and listen to it yourself, and then get it to the selector to say, hey, I don't know if you want to review this, somehow get a replacement disc, what steps you want to take. But at least they have a chance to look at it and say, hey, you know what, maybe we don't need this anymore, or maybe I need to get a replacement copy. And as always, resource sharing, which we talked about in the beginning, is something that is part of your decision making process, because can you get it via ILL? And also, is it available, say, on Palace, in Overdrive, Canopy, Hoopla, etc.? There's other places that you might be able to get AV materials. It's a different way of accessing them. So consider that as well. The primary factors here are, is it utilized? Is it popular? Meaning, does it circulate? And what condition is it in? So you want to factor all of that in. And then other formats that might be a little bit different from AV or kind of tangential to it are described very well in the crew manual. So take a look at that too. Next slide.
All right, we're getting close to the end here, where, as we mentioned, give us a few days with the recording. We caption them because the captions we're able to produce are a bit better than YouTube. And when we do that, we will also attach the slides, so you'll be able to get directly to these links. But we've got some information, ALA fact sheets, weeding guides from Scribed, and just sort of like other information for you here. OCLC has some really great information. A blog called the Awful Library blog has some really great reading information, including some that Linda Williams, who had this position before she retired and I stepped in, shared as well. School systems can sometimes be a little bit different in sort of what's required with their policies and things like that. So there's some school-specific school library journal articles, other blog articles that can maybe touch base to some of the specificity within the school systems. But quite frankly, at the end of the day, and maybe even more so in the schools, because the kids have classroom visits there and do education there sometimes, ultimately we need to put like accurate information and literature first. And it can be scary if we think that that might mean that we've got to replace a lot of our collection. But at the end of the day, right, think of the children. That's ultimately what it is that we're doing. There are some online courses. Web Junction has some. This video will be available to you. We hold at the State Library a license for Niche Academy. Every library worker in the state of Connecticut can make an account with their work email account to Niche Academy and get a whole host of self-paced courses and videos, not only about weeding, but about basically anything that you could possibly name right now. And as we mentioned, the Service Center, a library for librarians, has a host of other books that have been published that we have purchased so that you don't have to, because they're unnecessarily expensive sometimes. And at the end of the day, we just sort of have this graphic, which is about the life cycle of a book, because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about acquisitions. We're not just talking about deselection. We're talking ultimately about the entire process. We cannot bring more books into our library if we do not get rid of some books in our library. Weeding is a vital part of the acquisitions and the book cycle process, even though it can sometimes be the hardest and the scariest, because at times weeding is tied directly to the finances of of our library. But I think it's just important to look at the whole forest and not a tree or two. And that's ultimately what this graphic is here to tell us. And so we have some time. I might not play the entire video because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. And please feel free to drop any questions that you have for us in the chat. I didn't even mean to stop sharing. I meant to reshare, but like, that's fine. So when we did these in person, we would send folks into the stacks to do some weeding of their own. But when we did this for the first time after quarantine, I made a video so that we could share that video on how to use the weeding slips that we showed a clip of. And I'm going to play some of that video here just to give you an idea.
Hi everyone, this is Kim,
of what you're looking for.
Your children and young adult library consultant, and I'm here to record a short video on examples of books that you might want to read from your collection and how to use the weeding slips. So I'm going to turn my camera around here. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you are the weeding slips. This is the back, and this is the front. So you'll see on this weeding slip the acronym that we probably talked about in the webinar already, MUSTY. So this gives you kind of the outline of what you're looking for in a book that would require you to weed it, or that would put it up for weeding consideration. So we've got M for misleading, U for ugly, S superseded, T trivial, I irrelevant, and E elsewhere. So the first book that I would like to show you is this one, Inventions. So we can already look at the cover of this book and see that it's possible that it's a book that's a little older. The cover probably isn't going to be as interesting to the kids or teens that may come into our library looking for it. Let's open this book and check the publication date. So we'll see that this book was published in 2003, so well over 10 years ago. So let us come over here and take a look at our reading slip. So at first glance, I would categorize this as M, misleading, outdated or obsolete, and possibly also S, superseded. I am almost positive that there is a newer edition of, if not this exact book, Inventions, than a book that is fairly similar to it. So we would cross off M, outdated or obsolete, and possibly even S, superseded, if you have an additional copy of this book or something that's really comparable. And then we're going to take it to the back and we decide, is this a book that we want to repair, or is this a book that we want to replace? So there's nothing really structurally wrong with it. The spine is okay. None of the pages are ripped or watermarked. So this is just something that we would just want to go ahead and replace. So then you decide here with something else on this subject with the newer edition of the same book. So maybe with something else on this subject, and then you could write some notes in here if you wanted to. One of the things that makes this particular reading slip incredibly helpful is that there's this little key on the back here with publication dates, so that you can kind of compare what the call number of the book is if it's nonfiction, and then you can kind of decide, is it 3 years old, is it 10 years old, and so on and so forth. And we've already decided this book is over 10 years old. It's time. So what you would do if you were reading a giant section is you would pop this slip here in the book, and then you would pop it on a book cart. So that way, when you finally do get around to pulling these books from the system, you'll remember why it was you chose to read this particular book. So let's take a look at another one. So here we have 2 copies of the same Cultures of the World book on Ghana. So let's go ahead and open this to see when this book was published. And this book was published in 1999. That is quite some time ago. So we also happen to have a newer edition of Ghana, the same Cultures of the World series. And let's see when this book was published. This book was published in 2019, significantly better than 1999. You don't have to read both of these books to know that there is probably newer and more accurate information in the 2019 Cultures of the World's Ghana book than in the 1999 one. So let's go right on back to our reading slips here. And this is absolutely superseded by a newer edition. And if you even wanted to jot a little note down saying that this book was published in 1999, then you could do that. Now on the back here, if you wanted to use the note section, then you could put something along the lines of own new edition 2019. Again, we fill out these slips and we add these notes because odds are you can read the books, say, one day you isolate some time to go ahead and do that, but you might not get to actually pulling the book from the system for 1 or 2 weeks. And it's possible that maybe you aren't the one that pulls the books from the system. Maybe it's somebody in your tech services department. Putting these reading slips in here lets them know what your thought process was, why you're choosing to read the books, so that they kind of are on the same page as you are. So the last book that I'm going to pull for example is Myths and Civilization of Ancient Egypt. So now this book, it might be hard to tell in this video, but see these pages here. It looks like there's a little bit of water damage that happened with this book. We also have sort of some issues happening here in the spine at the top and at the bottom. So this book's had quite a bit of use. So when looking at the reading slip, I might in fact just mark this book as ugly. It just is. And what with regards to ancient Egypt, I'm not sure about your collections at your own libraries, but typically we have a lot of books on ancient Egypt. So for example, I've got this book here, Egyptian Towns. It's newer, it's more modern, it's something that's going to be a bit more visually appealing. Voices of Ancient Egypt, also a newer, slightly more modern book, as well as Crafts of the Ancient World, Crafts and Cultures of the Ancient Egyptians. So this book here is supposed to give readers information on civilization, and here I've just pulled 3 books, one of which is from National Geographic, that are going to have the same information, if not more. And then also something that we always want to do when we're considering books for deletion is take a look at the copyright date. And this book is from 1998. So, and also actually when I opened it, I noticed that the pages here, see how it's a bit warped? So there's actually probably a good amount of water damage with this book as well. And because I know that not only do I have these 3 books on ancient Egypt, there are a plethora more, we can easily choose to let this one go. Let's go ahead and finish marking this up. So it's worn beyond repair because there's nothing that we can do about the water damage. And then pictures or format outdated. You know what? I'm not sure if the pictures and format are outdated, but the book is definitely old. Like it's old. We can, wow, there's actually a lot of water damage here. I can see and feel as I'm trying to bend and turn the page. So while the pictures and or format might not necessarily be outdated, it's definitely warped. And what I might want to do here is write water damage. You know, and maybe add your initials to these too if there are multiple people in departments doing meetings, just so that if anyone wanted to contact you and kind of ask you what's going on, they'll know who it is. And I'm going to take this book and I'm also going to put it right here on my book cart. And this is the basic process for, you know, going through and weeding your materials and using the weeding slips. I hope this video was helpful.
I hope past me was helpful to you all. So there you go. That right there is there's the example of how a person can use the slips. As Brad mentioned earlier, every person, every library is going to come up with their own system. It took Brad and I some time to fall into, and now Abby and Kathy have joined to fall into a flow of how we handle our weeding process. Those slips, they're not a requirement. They're just there to help, especially if you're in a larger system and someone else is going to be ultimately making that final decision, like Brad mentioned, or maybe your tech services department is going to do the weeding and maybe they disagree or something and they kind of want to know what the catalyst was. It's just a tool that's there to help you, which is also linked on our LibGuides page. But after sort of the lovely reminder of weed it and reap, again, we will share the slides and the notes to our weeding workshop page. And I am going to stop sharing so I can get all this stuff off my screen to see if there are any questions. Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad this was informative. Brad and I give this workshop at least once a year, if not twice, and there's always a lot of people who come. So we're glad the information is helpful to y'all. We know this can be a bit of an art and a science weeding, so we're here to support and help provide information and a lot of thank yous. I'll take those thank yous. Also, just sort of quickly before I'm sure folks are beginning to scatter, but before everyone goes, we do have surveys that we ask folks to fill out. I am a chronic survey reader, and please, even if you don't want to say it here, if there's like new or additional information that you think would be beneficial to add to the workshop, links, resources, please feel free to share those freely in the anonymous survey. We adapt our offerings and our workshops often to make sure that we provide you with the best information that we can. Thank you.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, but thank you all for attending. It was a pleasure to be able to present this to you all today. If you do have other questions along the way, Kim and I love to talk library stuff, so call us, email us, let us know if we can help you out in any way. Not just with weeding, but with anything to do with libraries. Like I said, we love talking library stuff. So we're here and we work for you guys. We are librarians for libraries. So we work for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.